Great. And Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Carrie. And Diana, glad to have you back with us today. Diana has been with us last quarter and this quarter, and she's going to have a lot of commentary to add to some of the data that I have, and she's bringing some of her own data as well. As you can see on the screen, Diana Olaire is Senior Director of Market Intelligence, and I'm Senior Research Consultant at the ACEC Research Institute. So, Diana, welcome.
Thanks, Joe. Happy to be back.
All right, so we're going to move on here and we're going to talk about the economy first because there is a lot going on, and I think it's really important to share the data that we have so that everybody can understand what's happening around the industry and what may start to affect us. So this is GDP, and this came out on April 30th, so 3 weeks ago. This it showed the first estimate for the Q1 data for Q1 GDP, and it came in at 2%. So that's good news. The problem, if you want to, put it that way, is that the first estimate of Q4 was 1.4%, but the final estimate came in at 0.5%. So I think we need to watch that Q1 number and see what happens. Obviously, it was January, February, March. Beginning of the Iran war was there, as well as we did start to see a spike in inflation due to the oil price of oil go up. So we'll see what happens with that number. But my gut tells me it might be revised downward, but we will have to wait and see. The next release comes on May 28th. So stay tuned for that. All right, so good number. Let's hope it holds up. But let's look at the employment picture. This is not such a great chart. It's been a long, long time since we've had this much red on the employment chart. For the longest time, I didn't have any red, and about a year ago, it started showing up. So I want to give you sort of the big picture, long-term view. In 2023, we were producing a monthly average of 234,000 jobs. That was the monthly average. In 2024, we started to see a slowdown, and we saw 179,000 jobs per month on average. So not too bad. We want to make sure that the labor market wasn't overheating. The problem is that in 2025, excuse me, in all of 2025, the average monthly increase was less than 10,000. So another way to look at that is in all of 2025, we created fewer jobs than we did in 1 month, an average month in 2024. So the labor market is absolutely slowing down. Now, 76,000 jobs on average so far this year. Now, does that mean we're turning the corner? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not quite sure because the other data I had to show you really is something that shocked me. I was really, really surprised, and it's hard to shock me when I look at these numbers. But the other thing I want to point out is the unemployment rate. So from last June, it was 4.1%, started going up to November at 4.5. And then it's kind of come down and just gone sideways a little bit. Well, that's a really interesting thing, right? We think, okay, we started to create some jobs and the unemployment rate actually stopped going up. Let's put it that way. The problem is on the next slide. Remember, November 2025, 4.5% started to go down. Well, I always track this, and for the longest time, I was like, maybe I should stop talking about the labor force participation rate because it wasn't really telling us much. Well, it's telling us a lot right now. In the last reading that we got for April, that participation rate was 61.8%. That is down 1.5 percentage points from the height before the pandemic. But what's really, really, really concerning is since last November, it's fallen by 7.7%. So 0.7%. It was 62.5, and now it is down to 61.8. What this means is that compared to the pandemic number, if we had that same labor force participation rate, we'd have 4 million more people in the labor force. Now, what that means in this most recent downturn is that in the last 6 months, we've had 2 million people leave the labor force. Now, I should clarify that by saying they're in the labor force, but they're not working. Okay, so they're not participating in the labor. They're not looking for a job. They're not working in a job. They have either they've done something else. I did a little digging into the why behind it, but Diana, I think you might have done the same. So, what did you find out about this?
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what you found because when you first showed me this slide, it didn't hit me at first because, like I told you, I was actually thinking about maybe some of the government layoffs being a little bit delayed, which this could
Right.
still have some of those. But I started to dig a little bit deeper into the causes in labor participation. And, other things could be school enrollments, people with caregiving responsibilities, illness, overall job discouragement, which would not be good, or people giving up for a temporary withdrawal. And that's something that we don't want to happen necessarily because that would indicate a period of us entering a weaker labor market. But then on the other side, it could be the overall aging of the population and retirements accelerating. We just had a huge session about this at our annual convention. 10,000 Americans turn 65 every day. The 85 plus population is going to reach nearly double that size by 2035, excuse me. And so that's a really huge group. And then the other thing I found was lower immigration numbers and slower population growth. And so those severe drops within the last year have really weakened population growth. And that's just something I found from the Federal Reserve. But I'm really interested to hear what you found, Joe.
No, you hit all the marks that I was going to check off as well. Retirements, lower immigration, and migrants have a very high participation rate when they enter the labor force. So when you have lower immigration, that combats that. So there is a lot going on here, and there's a lot of people that are leaving. Obviously, the workforce here. So the bottom line is not just that 2 million people are off, are sitting on the sidelines now, or just retired, or whatever the case may be. But if those 2 million people were still in the labor force, our unemployment rate would actually be closer to 5.5%. So people are like, oh, unemployment rate is great. And yeah, that number is good. But if you start to dig, it's actually showing labor weakness. So I think you hit that point right on the head, Diana. I think we've been in a weak labor market, the low hire, low fire, etc. But now we're actually seeing people leave the workforce altogether, and that is not necessarily a good sign. So how does this translate into consumer spending? Well, okay, the good news, say, Joe, guess what? Consumer spending is actually holding up. And well, you're right. It was up in March by 0.9%, up in February by 0.6%. I keep watching these numbers and I keep thinking, wow, how is this happening? Well, one of the reasons, and I'm going to talk about a couple others, but one of the reasons is that the personal savings rate is going down. This little snapshot on the right doesn't do justice to what's really been happening long term. This slide does. So what's happening is that people are not saving as much as they had been because of the cost of living going up. And so we're seeing that in order to maintain your standard of living, people are saving less on average. The other thing I did some digging on was that we talked about this K-shaped economy. Well, what does that mean? And so I want to put that into perspective. What's happening here is all, not some, but all of the growth in consumer spending is due to the top 20% of wage earning households. 20% of households are spending 60% of consumer spending. The top 10% actually are responsible for 50% of consumer spending. That bottom 80%, they are struggling. They're barely keeping up with the cost of living, and when you count inflation into it, they are not adding to the bottom line when it comes to consumer spending. So this is where, again, you start piecing a lot of these disparate pieces together, and I'm starting to get a bit concerned about the labor market and whether that top 10 and 20% of households are going to continue to keep spending and keep growing the economy or not. So we talked about inflation a little bit earlier. Here you go. This is the headline CPI number. It's up to 3.8%. This was an increase in 2 months from 2.4% in February to 3.8% in April. The core rate, which is minus energy and food costs, went from 2.5 to 2.8. We're going in the wrong direction. As you know, the price of gasoline is now, the average is $4.50. I was looking at a really cool interactive tool on the AAA website. You can see state by state. California, those of you from the West Coast are facing an average of $6 per gallon of gasoline. So this is not good. This is not helping the economy, and it's putting pressure on inflation. And the problem with oil and gasoline, and it's not just gasoline, it's diesel fuel, it's jet fuel, and the Strait of Hormuz is not open. So the reason that we are continuing to not see a higher level of energy prices is because states are tapping into their emergency reserves. That's going to run out within the next few weeks. And we have global reserves that could, if we produce no more oil at all starting today, our global reserves theoretically could last us 300 days. So you're like, okay, Joe, what's the worry? Well, these reserves are not the emergency reserves that I just mentioned, and they're not easy to bring to market. They don't have pipelines that are, connected to them. So we could, if something doesn't happen soon to open up the Strait of Hormuz, we could see real energy supply disruptions in the next 3 weeks or so. The analysts that I keep reading say, oh, well, we're assuming that that's going to stop, that the Strait of Hormuz will open. And they're assuming that because otherwise we're going to have severe supply disruptions. So I'm like, okay, that's not a good way. That's not a good reasoning for an assumption on my part. So anyways, I'm really concerned about that. I'm concerned about the inflation numbers. I'm concerned about the job front. And I, don't want to make too much of this, but it's just the data. The Federal Reserve's preferred inflation measure is the PCE. It's the personal consumption expenditures, and this is even higher than the consumer price index. So again, we are not going in the right direction here. And so most analysts are saying, well, the Federal Reserve will have to increase interest rates. Otherwise, we're going to have a problem. That is also going to cool the economy as well. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now, maybe more so than I'm used to seeing in the economy. And so what does our sentiment data tell us? This is, of course, from the consumer sentiment, the business sentiment survey that we conduct every quarter. We have about 600 individuals, firm leaders from across the industry. They respond to this survey, and we are seeing that inflation concerns have spiked. This survey was taken in April, so it was actually about 4 weeks ago. The high on this metric was in Q2 of 2022, as we were near the top of our 9% CPI. If we go back to that chart, you would see that, and so I think we're going to be getting there in Q3 if something doesn't change. So inflation concerns are very, very hot at the moment. And just for those of you who are new, this net rating system that we use, we take the percentage of positive responses and we subtract the percentage of negative responses. So you could have a plus 100 or you could have a negative 100. In this case, again, a plus is not good because we're talking about inflation concern. And that is interesting to see. All right, tariff concerns continue to fall, however. So we obviously we started asking this last year in Q2, and we've seen those concerns start to fall off. But there still are people who are concerned. And Diana, I know you had some things you wanted to point out about this.
Yeah, so it was really interesting that it's kind of fallen off from being the hottest topic to not so much. So I was curious myself on what the heck's going on with it. So when I looked it up, I found that after the IEEPA-based tariffs were struck down by the courts, the administration responded by imposing a new 10% tariff. And this allowed the president to impose temporary tariffs on those that were struck down. I'm sorry, I'm getting a phone call. Then, however, the courts again ruled that this action exceeded the limits of the existing statute. Again, I'm not an attorney, but the case moved to the Court of Appeals. And then on May 12th, which was just about a week ago, they issued a 10-day administrative stay. So that stay keeps the tariffs in place temporarily while the court reviews the DOJ's request for a longer stay pending appeal. So in practical terms, the 10-day stay does four things. It keeps Section 122 tariffs in effect for now. It does prevent sudden tariff removal, which we're afraid of could actually create severe disruption in supply chains. It gives the court time to evaluate the DOJ's request for a long-term stay, and it maintains the status quo while the appeal is considered. So for the moment, actually, it appears that at least until I think tomorrow when the 10-day expires, the 122 tariffs remain in place, but their long-term status depends on the outcome of the appeal. So still very there, just maybe quiet for now.
Yeah, so definitely some stuff happening, and we'll see if it stays sort of under the radar or if these concerns sort of renew themselves come the Q3 survey, which will be in July. Interesting information. Thank you, Diana, for clarifying all of that for us. And so, of course, what we have in the last piece we're going to talk about are mortgage rates, because this has to do with housing affordability. It also is a bellwether of what's happening in the economy. And I just had to update this morning because 11 days ago it was below 6.5%, and it's just shot straight up. So we're seeing that again, the market is anticipating that borrowing costs are going to increase, and therefore mortgage rates are following suit. And this is obviously not good news either for consumers. Diana, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, so while mortgage rates are part of the story, today's housing market is really being shaped by, and you hinted at this, the affordability challenges and limited inventory. This is reinforced even further by that lock-in effect with rates that I know you and I both got back in, I think, 21. And then there's also shifting regional demand that's impacting it as well. So even as rates fluctuate, the combination of elevated home prices, high construction costs, and that limited supply continues to keep many buyers on the sidelines. At the same time, facing a national housing shortage, that's a problem, but could potentially offer an opportunity. So for engineering firms, this means that there will be a long-term need for new housing, both single family and multifamily. It remains strong, that demand, even if the near-term activity is a little bit uneven. From ACEC's perspective, this is a real priority area. Our Market Intelligence Committee is tracking these trends closely, and part of our mission is to collaborate with other associations on this. One example is the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, which aims to streamline housing production by modernizing outdated programs, reducing regulatory burdens, expanding infrastructure investment, and giving local communities more investment. So the takeaway is this: mortgage rates matter, but the deeper drivers of the housing market are affordability, supply constraints, and policy momentum. And if we and our members can get behind that, we can create real opportunities for firms.
So, Diana, this is a great segue because I've just been talking a lot about the economy at large and how there's a lot of red flags out there. But what we're seeing within our industry is actually pretty good. So, Diana, I'm going to turn it back over to you for a little bit and give us some of those numbers that you're tracking.
All right, thanks, Joe. So here the latest census data shows combined AE sector revenue. It closed out 2025 on solid ground. Fourth quarter revenue reached 124.5 billion. This is a 1.1% year-over-year increase, which is modest growth, but solid performance given the uneven momentum across particular specific design and construction markets, which we'll get into next. But looking at the full year, The industry generated about $495 billion in revenue, which was up 4% from 2024. That performance underscores how resilient the sector remained despite higher interest rates, softer construction spending, and this broader economic uncertainty. So for design firms, the signal's clear. Demand held up better than expected, even with mixed indicators in the construction pipeline. The AE market maintained a strong revenue base heading into 2026. So on the next slide, let's take a look at where design and construction spending stands today. So according to the latest U.S. Census Value of Construction Put in Place survey, which tracked total design and construction spending, it reached a seasonally adjusted annual rate of $2.2 trillion as of March 26. That represents a 0.6% increase month over month and a 1.6% increase year over year. When we break that down, we see a clear split between public and private markets, which you can see here. Private construction spending's up 1% year over year, showing steady but moderate growth. Meanwhile, public construction spending's up 3.8%, reflecting continued strength in federally supported infrastructure programs and also state and local capital investment. Overall, the first quarter of 26 shows the industry in a stronger position than this time last year. Both public and private sectors are contributing that growth, but public is, of course, giving a little bit more of the lift here. And this really reinforces what we're hearing from firms and in what Joe's showing in his data, that demand remains durable, the pipeline of work is there, which continues to support a stable outlook for the industry, I would say. And then next, we look at construction spending in two major categories. So this is residential and non-residential. What we're seeing in the latest data is a continuation of a trend that's been building since last year. I'd say in aggregate, the industry has essentially been flat since April of 24. But again, as I hinted at earlier, the performance between the subsectors was uneven. Residential is actually showing to be a bright spot with spending up 3.5% year over year. That reflects strong demand due to the supply and affordability issues that I mentioned earlier. On the other hand, non-residential construction is much softer, up just 0.2% year over year, but still positive. Some markets are holding steady. Others have slowed, creating kind of this mixed bag on commercial segments. So the takeaway here is that overall market looks a bit flat, but the underlying story is very different depending on where you sit and what markets you're working in. Residential is carrying more of the momentum, while non-residential is suffering a little bit because of that high interest rate environment. And then on the next slide, okay, so Joe and I discussed this earlier this week and we decided that it had to be added. So we also had some data from ACC's chief economist, and what we're seeing right now is a sharp spike in oil prices. I think we're all feeling that. Nearly a 50% jump in just a few months. I'm sure you all could see it on the slide and your wallets. So how's this going to impact engineering firms though? So higher fuel costs can show up in contractor bids, delivery charges, and the overall cost structure of the projects that you're designing. But the bigger story is what comes next, which Joe talked about, supply chain stress, which is going to potentially, probably most likely rise again, especially with congestion around the Strait of Hormuz. And historically, supply chain pressure has a stronger and broader impact on construction costs than oil alone. These shocks don't hit right away though. They typically show up 8 to 9 months later as they work through materials, logistics, and procurement. So while oil spikes are the visible pressure today, supply chain stress, like Joe said, is the signal that tells us where the project costs are heading later this year. Joe, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything else or if you got it all in there.
No, I kind of jumped the gun earlier. I apologize for that, but no, I think you really helped to put that into perspective of, okay, how does that impact us, right, in the industry? So no, have nothing else to add on that. I think we've beaten that horse enough.
All right, sounds good. So let's take a look here at the top performing, which will be in the orange at the top of the slide. These are the top performing markets so far this year. We're looking at year-to-date data from January to March of 25 to the same period this year. excuse me. Sewage and waste disposal continues to be one of the strongest growth markets. However, it's not an extremely large segment. The category has really been consistently lifted by long-term infrastructure investment and favorable regulations driven by aging systems and climate-driven pressures. A construction group article put out yesterday, I saw stating that there is a $630 billion backlog in national wastewater infrastructure. So I find that extremely interesting. And then I also spoke with Jordan Ball, who leads ACEC's Water and Environment Committee, and they are closely tracking the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, which is up for reauthorization in the fall. It's the primary source of federal funding for states to carry out their own loan programs for wastewater projects. And so if you're interested in getting involved with that, I could definitely get you his information. Amusement and recreation is another high performing sector showing double-digit year-to-date growth. We also see religious, conservation development, and lodging rounding out the top five. Lodging in particular is benefiting actually from a rebound in travel and hospitality investment. And then while it doesn't quite make the top five, it's worth calling out the office sector, which is performing better than many expected. Year-to-date office spending is just behind lodging at 5.4% growth, so it just missed the cutoff. And that's almost entirely because data centers are classified within this in the office category. Spending on data centers alone reached $11.4 billion this year. That's a 32% increase from last year. And so we're going to keep talking about data centers throughout this presentation. But at the bottom here, these are the markets that are showing the weakest performance so far this year. So what we're seeing in 26 is essentially a stabilization of the trends we saw through 25 with one important improvement. So at the end of last year, 7 out of 17 markets were declining year over year. Today, as you can see here, only one market is showing year-to-date declines, and that's manufacturing. However, it's important to put that into some context because manufacturing still remains the largest non-residential construction market in the country. So its year-over-year declines isn't a sign of collapse necessarily. It's more a reflection of how much spending surged in prior years post-COVID. Other markets near the bottom include public safety, residential, commercial, and educational. But here's the encouraging part. 3 sectors that struggled significantly over the past 2 years, residential, commercial, lodging, are now showing positive year-to-date growth. Residential and commercial are still among the lowest growth markets again, but they've at least moved back into that positive territory, kind of showing that maybe the drag from higher interest rates could be easing. But I might walk that back now because the war's kind of thrown us for a loop and we're in a sticky inflation area, so we'll see what happens next. So the takeaway is while a few markets remain soft, the overall picture is better than last year. Most sectors have returned to growth, and even the weakest performers are showing some signs of leveling out rather than continuing to climb, which is great news. All right, let's see what's on the next slide here.
Yep,
That's
I think
you.
it's back to my sentiment data. Yeah, no, thanks, Diana. That was really, really great data. I think it's amazing all of that data that you're tracking and the other folks on the ACEC side of the house. So here we're going to go back to the sentiment survey. This is what the firm leaders are telling us sort of in real time, whereas a lot of the other data we get is lagging. So what the firm leaders are telling us is that their positivity regarding the U.S. economy is not surprisingly down. And it's down considerably, right? So we fell by 26 points there. We're still in positive territory, and it's not as bad as it was in Q2 of last year, which was when the tariffs were announced. So, but it will again. I'm really waiting and anxious to see what we'll see in July, to see where these numbers head and what happens over the next month and a half, really, in the economy. But as Diana really, I think, expertly pointed out, the industry is doing quite well, and you all are telling us that the industry is doing quite well. You all are telling us that your firm finances are doing quite well. So regardless of what's happening around us at the moment, the economy, our industry is still doing very, very well. This just gives you a breakdown of the regions as well as firm size with that condition of the U.S. economy data. You can see all of these segments are down over the prior quarter. And from last year, compared to last year, they're still, again, almost all of them are above where they were last year, with a couple exceptions. So this is also available in the full report. So when we get to the end, I'm going to show you the QR code for the full sentiment survey report, and you'll be able to get all this data. That's another reason why I want to show you this information, because we do have it broken down by region as well as firm size. So going back to those sectors, Diana, we see that sentiment from our firm leaders is highest in the data center category at a plus 87. It's down just a couple points from last quarter, but it's up 9 points from a year ago. And I think your data underscores why that is the case, right? Like, data centers are growing. They're still being built. They're gonna be built as far as we know into the foreseeable future. The demand is not letting up. And energy and utilities that are powering the energy that's powering those data centers is also very, very high in sentiment. And you talked about the need for more energy for data centers, Diana. Transportation, water, wastewater, those are also very positive. The yellow circles doesn't mean it's bad at all. It just means they're, sort of secondary to those top performers. But all of these sectors are in the positive. All of them are quite strong right now. Diana, this really ties in nicely to the data you have, right?
Yeah, so I'll probably add a little bit more in the forward looking, but going down from the list top to bottom, I would say this is pretty in line with the top five and bottom five markets that I covered earlier. From top down, science and technology is likely riding that emerging tech wave. There's a renaissance of advanced technologies from automation to robotics. Data centers, not surprised. Healthcare facilities, not surprised. Energy and utilities are getting a ripple effect of growth from data centers due to the momentum of AI. Airports could still be riding what's left of IIJA. Water, wastewater, I covered in top five. Roads and bridges aren't in the top five, though. Growth is flat to modest, though it isn't my area of expertise, but always a well-funded category. And so that's what I would have to say on these.
Yeah, and to your point, commercial real estate, residential land development, those are the lowest, the two lowest. They're still positive here, but they are the lowest of all the sectors, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's take a look at backlog. Again, this is why we are seeing continued resiliency within our industry. Your backlogs are remaining solid. We, throughout the course of the sentiment survey, for almost 5 years now, going on 6 years, we see that the backlog median has been around 11 or 12. We did see a dip in Q2 of last year when there was a lot of uncertainty regarding some of those federal contracts, but we did bounce back in Q3, and we've been very consistent at 11 months. Again, in the full report, you can find the breakdown by firm size as well as region. Obviously, firm size does have a big impact on the backlog. So typically, smaller firms have a 6-month backlog. The largest firms, that 500 plus FTE category, tends to have 12 months or more. And of course, the biggest firms have even bigger backlogs than that. So, backlog story, good news. We also see that 9 out of 10 firms still have open positions. I actually should have updated that slide. It did come down just a little bit. So we're actually at 84%. So I got to round down now to say 8 out of 10 firms still have open positions, but nonetheless, hiring remains strong. We see that the median number of open positions is 5. Again, you see here that it varies greatly by firm size. And when you look at total open positions as a percentage of overall FTEs, we're at 7%. Given that our industry employs about 1.5 million people directly, that 7% is actually quite significant, right? So it's like, it's a lot of people, a lot of openings, people are hiring. And we'll have a little bit more to say on workforce later. It was part of our hot topic section this month. All right, so let's take a quick look at what the future holds here. The future U.S. economic sentiment turned negative, not though as severely negative as what we saw last year in Q2. Again, that was right after the tariffs were announced. So my read on this is that people are getting a little bit more used to the ups and downs of what's happening around in the economy, and we're pretty much saying, okay, I guess it's kind of going to be the same, right? So when you're around zero, you have as many people saying it's going to be better as the number of people who say it's going to be worse, and so they kind of cancel each other out. You definitely have your optimists, you definitely have your pessimists, but again, overall, we definitely are looking at pretty much here. It's going to be the same as what we've been seeing. Now, we are positive when it comes to the engineering and design services industry, so still at a plus 12. And even more importantly, your firm finances, you're at a plus 38, and that's been growing steadily since Q2 of last quarter. So all the news, again, is pointing to the positive when it comes to our industry. Again, this is US sentiment broken down. I'm going to kind of just skip over that. You can look at this again later or in the full report. And here we go with the future sentiment regarding those sectors. Now, the numbers are lower, but that's because of how we ask the question. It's a little differently. We ask, is it going to get better or worse, as opposed to how is it doing right now? So this is, again, the balance between the better and the worse. We see energy and utilities plus 47. So definitely people are very bullish on the energy and utilities. Data centers, a plus 33, although that is down quite a bit from last quarter. So maybe a little bit of softening in terms of future expectations and future sentiment regarding data centers. But again, these are all the areas that are circled where those areas pretty much on the current sentiment slide. Diana, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so starting at the top, Joe, I know when we looked at this data, we were a little surprised to see federal, military, state, and local governments building really rounding out up there in that top five. So I actually reached out to Bradley Saul, who leads ACEC's Federal Agency and Procurement Advocacy Committee. And he actually let me know about these potential drivers that could be shifting this future, potential future demand. So one is the defense budget request for fiscal year 27 is about $1.5 trillion between appropriations and potential reconciliation funds, so potential investment coming through there. Second, the conflict in Iran has also pushed military toward more of a war footing, driving activity across the defense sector. And then there's a bill called MILCON VA. It includes a modest increase for military construction. So much of the surge they're actually hearing about is tied to expanded defense manufacturing, weapons and major systems at work companies like RTX, Lockheed, Northrop, and Anduril. I hope I'm saying that right. And at the same time, GSA, which is probably most of this number, is preparing to actually offload a number of federal properties, creating redevelopment opportunities. So together, these factors could really be lifting expectations overall for the government-related building markets in the next 12 months. Healthcare facilities, again, that aging population is driving the need for healthcare. I don't want to beat a dead horse there. I think everybody knows about that silver tsunami. And then energy and utilities and data centers. So one of the most important structural forces shaping demand across the built environment is the rapid expansion of AI, and thus the infrastructure needed for it, which is data centers. So these facilities have become major drivers of industrial real estate, requiring large land parcels, power adjacent sites, and highly specialized engineering. So this is one of the strongest growth areas that we're tracking. At the same time, expansion of data centers is reshaping the power market, which you see here is going to be the highest expected to perform in the next 12 months. These facilities are projected to triple their share of US electricity consumption by 2028, which is triggering significant investment in grid capacity, transmission, substation upgrades. Again, this is all from data center development, giving that ripple effect into power. For energy firms, this can represent sustained demand in energy infrastructure. But the influence of data centers, I found, extends beyond industrial and power. I found that in a Cushman and Wakefield 26 analysis, they reported that AI growth is expected to generate 330 million square feet of commercial real estate demand over the next decade, and nearly 300 million square feet of industrial space. And then this I found interesting, roughly 94,000 new multifamily units. So it's a multi-market opportunity that touches industrial development, power systems, site work, and housing. From ACEC's market intelligence perspective, this is exactly the kind of cross-sector trend that we're prioritizing and are tracking. Data centers aren't just a technology story, they're a real estate story too, a power story, and a housing story. And it'll be one of the most significant drivers of energy or engineering demand in the year ahead, I would say.
Great, great information, Diana. Thank you so much. So let's get back to some of our sentiment data. This is why sentiment is negative among those people who have negative sentiment. And so you can see that political and environment and uncertainty, that's been at the top of the list now for about a year and a half or so, maybe 2 years. It was not always that way, but it has stayed at the top. And then, of course, inflation and rising costs. No surprise there. That spiked by 20 percentage points. So more people are concerned about that, and it is driving pessimism to a greater degree than it had been previously. So debuting at the number 3 spot, not necessarily that's a great place to debut, but geopolitical tensions and armed conflicts around the world. Not something we've asked in the past, but we obviously saw a need to include that now. So that debuted at number 3. So general economic uncertainty maintains its relatively significant position there as well, and recession concerns have also increased. So, we're seeing that there's a lot of concerns out there. Again, I think most of these are very much tied to the general U.S. economy, but as Diana said, these things can eventually flow through to our industry as well. Here's another slide just talking about additional concerns. Again, you can see tariff impacts have continued to fall in terms of their level of concern among our firm leaders. But again, interest rates increasing, that spiked. It was almost below 10% there. Now it's up 20 points to 31%. I expect that might continue to increase in Q3, but we shall see. Future backlog, again, this is good news. People are very confident about future backlog continuing to at least stay the same or increase. So that's good news right there. And hiring, we're also looking quite good. Again, it's softened just a little bit over the last year and a half, as I think the broader economy has softened in terms of jobs. But I've always said that that was not a bad thing for our industry, because our labor market is very, very tight, particularly when it comes to engineers. So this is not necessarily a bad thing that we see it, down just a little bit, but it's, again, hiring is continuing to be very, very strong. As we talked about before, recession concerns are increasing. So this is a specific question that we ask every quarter. We ask firm leaders on a scale of 0% to 100%, how likely do you think it is the U.S. will be in recession in the next 6 months? So we did see a jump here, 8 percentage points. The high water mark was last year at this time at 54%. We came off that high a little bit, and now we're coming back up a bit. So this is really kind of a 50-50, right? It's it's anyone's guess as to whether we will enter a recession this year or not. All right, so let's talk about some of the hot topics. So we did ask some questions on workforce. We had asked them in prior surveys. These are hot topic questions are not typically asked every quarter, but we do tend to revisit them to check in and see where they are. But we also asked some new questions about health insurance, which I know is a new sort of rising priority for ACEC overall. So we asked how difficult or how easy it is to find qualified engineers, as well as finding qualified non-engineering staff. And you can see that those percentages have come down just a little bit since Q3 2024, but they're still quite high, particularly around finding qualified engineers. We asked whether, on a scale, right, a 5-point scale, very easy to very difficult. I'm not showing the very easy because there weren't many people who said it's very easy to find folks right now. So that's why we're focusing on the percent difficulty. Now, when we talk about retaining engineers and retaining non-engineer staff, That's not quite as difficult to retain, and even better numbers than we saw a year and a half ago relative to, say, finding qualified engineers. So the real sticking point is still finding qualified engineers, but it's also not really that easy yet to find other folks, and retaining has become much easier. So that is good news. This one really surprised me. So we have been asking this question for quite a few years now, since the beginning of 2023. Because of the workforce shortage, has your firm had to turn down work? We saw a pretty significant decline here compared to Q4 of 2024. So in the last year and a half, fewer firms are turning down work because they don't have enough staff. So that's good news, right? At least we're seeing that now there may be less work in some cases, but according to Diana's data, that is not the case. Sorry, I skipped the question there. But nonetheless, fewer firms are turning down work due to workforce shortages. So that is good news. Now, what types of work are those 33% of firms that are turning down work? What are they doing? Well, pretty much the same as what we saw in a year and a half ago. Firms are being more selective about the projects they accept. They're turning down less profitable work. I'm still concerned about the number at the bottom there. We are turning down good, profitable projects. That percentage is still at about, a fourth to a fifth of those firms who have turned down work said that that's what they're doing. So that's not good news. I want to see that number go down to zero. So that's what's happening on the employment front. And now let's take a quick look at healthcare. So this is, again, not something we had asked before, but obviously labor is your most expensive or most costly part of your firm. Benefits are probably second for most of you. And then among those benefits, health insurance premiums tend to be, by and large, much more expensive than anything else. So how concerned are firm leaders about the cost of health insurance premiums? We have 9 out of 10 firm leaders are at least somewhat concerned. And you have a third who are extremely concerned. So healthcare, health insurance is a big concern for our firms. We asked firms, are you, when you last renewed, did your health insurance premium increase, stay the same, or decrease? 8 out of 10 firms said their health insurance premiums increased, and the average increase was 14%. That's pretty significant, and you see that more than a fourth of firms had increases of more than 15%. So obviously that mean is higher than the median because there are a lot of firms who had really big increases in their insurance premiums. So this is another area of concern. Diana, I know you've been doing a lot on the ACEC side of the house with the ACEC Life Health Trust. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Joe. And so I was looking at our chat. I didn't see any questions come through. So either you guys are being very shy today or I don't have access to that. But go ahead and put those in because we got about 10 minutes left. But yes, we did recently do a panel with a doctor from Hip Nation who's really looking at advancing primary care. And then also Mark Van Elden of the Life Health Trust. And so I pulled a couple of those stats to share with you all that you might be interested in. First, total national health spending hit $5.3 trillion in 24, 18% of GDP, and it's projected to be over 20% of GDP by 2033. So that is exponential. Medicare and Medicaid are the largest spenders by category. That silver tsunami is the core driver of Medicare growth. That's putting upward pressure on the market. Medical debt is the most common debt in collections. Debt collections is actually number one. And in the United States, just under 60% of all debt collection entries are from unpaid medical bills. Thus, more people are waiting to go see the doctor for preventative care due to this debt, thus worsening the problem. They don't want to go do preventative care, and so they're pushing up disease rates for cardiovascular diseases and other things. And it's just not a good picture right now, that's for sure. And definitely something that I think will be on the next political ballot coming up. It'll definitely be a talking point, Joe.
Yeah, I have a personal anecdote story here. Again, while we're waiting for some questions, we do have time. We've shared all the data we have for today, so please send your questions to us. But I have a very, very good friend of mine, and she's on Medicaid, and she went to the doctor last year at some point, and she asked about, what she wanted to get on Ozempic, right? And the doctor was like, "Well, you don't qualify." She's like, "What do you mean I don't qualify?" The doctor said, "Well, you're not, overweight enough." She was like, what about preventative care? I don't want to get any more overweight." And the doctor said, "Preventive what? Preventative what?" So, yeah, it's funny but not funny, right? So I think that's a interesting story to tell about, the situation of healthcare at the moment. That something we really do need to focus more on and tackle a bit. All right, so those are all of our slides for today. Again, we are happy to answer any questions that you all might have. Diana, do we have any yet?
I don't see any, unless I'm not privy to it. I'm not seeing any questions. I'm not sure if Carrie is seeing any, but I've got a blank screen. I think people are checked out. This is Friday because it's the holiday weekend, so people are ready to go, I think.
Oh, you're right. Okay, look, we finally got a couple questions in there. Um, oh, actually, Carrie just said none here. Okay, so question from Michael. Thank you, Michael. Is it possible to see quarterly sentiment ratings for some recessionary times? Diana, do you want to talk about the market data you have?
Well, so I think in regard to sentiment, I don't know that the ACAC Research Institute has been around long enough to have captured that data. I will
That
say
is
that when
correct.
But I will say when looking at like our CPIP and things we track from the US Census, we can show that. And I would definitely direct you to our market intel dashboard on the acec.org website under resources, market intelligence. You can break out by market over a time series trend and see where those recessions were.
Yeah, so that's good information, and you're absolutely right. So the ACEC Research Institute, we actually sort of set up shop the week before the pandemic hit, and then we were focused on surveying regarding impacts of the pandemic. We did not start these business sentiment surveys until about a year and a half after the pandemic hit. So we do not have data yet, but and I'm not hoping for a recession at all. But if we do, we will be able to track what happens with our sentiment data as well. Okay, let's see. Another question, Diana. For scenario planning, I'm curious to see how bad it has gotten or could get on your sentiment ratings during a recession. Yeah. Okay. Well, again, there's more of a comment, but thank you again, Michael. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Again, hopefully we don't have a recession, but and it's inevitable, right? At some point, it's inevitable.
Yeah, I would
Okay,
say
go ahead,
if I
Diana.
could add, Joe, I was on a call with the Society of Marketing Professional Services, which is the association for the marketing and business development of engineering, architecture, and construction firms. And it was interesting to hear them. They were talking about how many interns they're actually hiring to deal with the influx of the energy demand. And so it's interesting that that job growth, regardless of what's going on in the broader economy across all the other industries, our jobs and employment growth is still performing and doing extremely well. The second thing I'll add, I was listening to Bloomberg on the way into work this morning, and it said that even if the Strait of Hormuz opens and oil prices go back down, even though we think we're going to hit six very soon, is that inflation is still very real and it's going to happen either way. And so it'll be really interesting, and we'll continue to track that and report on it, what this new Fed chair and what the Fed's going to do in future meetings. So that'll be really interesting. And hopefully that will help lend itself to the data that the Institute provides with sentiment to give a clear picture of what we might see in the future. But no crystal balls here.
Yeah. Now, oh, we got another question, Diana. So regarding the 4% year-over-year revenue growth, would you attribute that to rate escalation?
I don't know if the quarterly services sentiment or the quarterly services survey accounts for price escalation or inflation. And so that's something that I would have to look into. I also think escalation is very state or local specific. But you can reach out to me. We can leave my email if you want to follow up with me directly on that. But from what I'm seeing is that escalation is kind of a more of a local issue.
Okay. Yeah, we do have, for those of you who registered, and thank you, Frank, for your question, we do have your email addresses. So we can get back to you, Frank, on that question. So I know we have a couple more minutes. I don't see any more questions, Diana. So I just want to say a very heartfelt thank you to all of the donors who make the research that we do possible. The ACEC Research Institute is separate from ACEC. And so we do rely upon the contributions of many of the firms, or all the firms you see here, as well as many of the ACEC state organizations. So if you see your firm here, thank you so very much. If you are part of one of these state organizations, ACEC, please, again, thank you so much. If you are not a current donor and would like to, please, please, please reach out to Daphne Bryant. She will be happy to talk to you. Again, all the research we do is made possible by our donors. We couldn't do it without you. And for those of you who are sticking around for the QR code, thank you so much. Here it is. The Business Sentiment Survey report is now live, and use this QR code to access it. If you don't like QR codes for some reason, or they don't work very well for you, you can also go straight to the ACEC Research Institute website. You can download the report for free. All of the research that we produce is free and available to all members as well as non-members. So again, thank you all very much. Diana, it was a pleasure speaking with you again today. Thank you so much for joining us on our Q2 Business Sentiment webinar. And I hope to see you again in 3 months.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Diana.